In the early days of January 2026, the Philippines braced for what meteorologists would later call one of the most devastating storms in recent memory. Super Typhoon Uwan, known internationally as Fung-Wong, roared across the Pacific with sustained winds reaching 185 kilometers per hour and gusts that topped 230. Its massive gale field stretched 1,800 kilometers wide, sweeping across Luzon and the Visayas like a dark curtain pulling over the islands. Over 1 million people evacuated their homes in a single day, fleeing ahead of a storm that seemed to defy every prediction. But the real terror wasn't just the wind or the rain. It was what happened when Uwan arrived on top of ground that was already broken, rivers that were already swollen, and infrastructure that was barely holding together from the last disaster. The question wasn't whether the typhoon would cause destruction. It was whether the country could withstand being hit again before it had time to heal. When Uwan made landfall in Aurora province on the morning of January 10th, the government's highest storm warning, signal number 5, covered much of northern and eastern Luzon. This designation is reserved for catastrophic destruction, the kind that rewrites landscapes and erases communities. Airlines grounded more than 300 flights across Manila, Clark, Legazpi, and Cebu. Sea travel throughout the eastern and central regions was suspended entirely, with wave warnings posted for heights up to 14 meters. In coastal towns, power lines snapped, trees toppled, and the first bands of the typhoon pushed floodwaters into streets and fields. Barangay leaders used loudspeakers and text alerts to urge anyone still at home to move to higher ground. Some families carried only a single bag. Others clutched children wrapped in raincoats, all racing against nightfall to avoid being trapped by rising water or blocked roads. Shelters filled fast in Aurora, Catanduanes, and Bala, but many had roofs damaged from the previous storm and offered little more protection than the homes people had left behind. What made Uwan especially dangerous was its timing. Just days earlier, Typhoon Calmei had battered the same region, dumping torrential rain and saturating the soil on mountain slopes and river basins. The ground was soaked, leaving almost nowhere for new rain to go. Any additional downpour would send water rushing over fields, highways, and straight into low-lying towns. River gauges across Luzon were already reporting levels not seen since the worst floods of the previous year. At Buntun Station on the Cagayan River, readings showed 10.2 meters, already past the critical threshold, with more rain coming in from Uwan's outer bands. Downstream, Magat Dam was releasing over 2,200 cubic meters per second, trying to prevent an uncontrolled spill, but the water below was already 7.8 meters above its own critical mark. In the Bicol region, the Naga City floodwall gauge passed 2.4 meters, forcing new evacuation orders as urban flooding began. Hydrologists warned that with every hour of heavy rain, the risk of sudden landslides and flash floods rose sharply. The land simply could not take more water, yet the typhoon kept coming, relentless and indifferent. Infrastructure damage from Calmei remained a weak point across multiple provinces. In Aurora, a 180-meter breach in Bala's coastal seawall was only patched with sandbags, with full repairs delayed due to missing materials. The Magat Bridge in Isabela, a key supply route, had undermined piers and was restricted to light vehicles. Any further rise in water could force a total closure. In Cagayan, the Tuao River Bridge approach road was still collapsed, leaving only a temporary bypass vulnerable if waters kept rising. Shelters in several provinces were running below capacity, not because of a lack of need, but because many roofs had been damaged by Calmei and had not been fixed. Some evacuation centres were now as exposed as the homes people had left behind. A forecaster from PAGASA summed it up plainly. A super typhoon after a major storm means our risk maps go from urgent to critical. With rivers already high and defences weakened, even a moderate surge or another burst of rain could trigger fast, widespread disaster. Storm surge became the most immediate threat along the eastern bays and river mouths. Advisories warned that water heights could reach 2 to 4 meters in Bala Bay, Limon Bay, San Miguel Bay, and the Cagayan Delta, enough to submerge single-story homes and sweep away vehicles. In Bala, the tide was set to peak just after midnight, increasing the risk that surge and high tide would overlap. Local officials urged anyone near the shore or riverbanks to move to higher ground before dark. Evacuation centres in Aurora and Camarines Norte were already close to capacity. Some shelters were sandbagged, but many sat within the projected flood zone. In Bela, the central evacuation centre was just meters above sea level, with staff monitoring live surge readings and preparing for possible relocation if waters rose too quickly. In Laman Bay, surge polygons showed up to 8,000 people living inside the 4-metre risk zone, including entire barangays like Burdeos and Kapalonga. Local power substations and hospitals fell within these flood polygons, raising concern that both electricity and emergency care could be cut off if the surge overtopped defences. Some seawalls in Moban and Infanta had only been patched with sandbags after damage from Calmei and were not expected to withstand a new onslaught. Residents who remembered Typhoon Haiyan's wall of water were not waiting for confirmation. Many had already left, carrying only essentials and hoping the surge would not reach their homes this time. As the storm intensified, sirens blared across coastal towns. Some were labelled as tsunami warnings, others as general emergency alerts. Social media filled with posts claiming a tsunami was coming as families rushed from the shore. The confusion often started with siren systems. In many coastal barangays, the same towers are programmed for both tsunami and storm surge alerts. During a storm like Uwan, local officials may sound the siren to warn of rising water, sometimes using the tsunami mode by mistake, or because the system does not have a separate surge setting. Logs from towns in Aurora and Camarines Norte showed multiple cases where the wrong siren mode was activated during peak surge threats. In past years, sensors had also misfired after detecting sudden changes in sea level, even when those changes were just surge or wind-driven waves, not seismic activity. A true tsunami in the Philippines requires one of two things: a powerful offshore earthquake or a massive underwater landslide. Typhoons, no matter how violent, cannot directly cause a tsunami. Officials from the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, and PAGASA all confirmed there was no tsunami warning in effect. The confirmed ocean threat was storm surge, and the distinction mattered. What struck many observers as especially troubling was not just the storm's power, but the way it seemed to exploit every weakness in the system. Relief supplies had been pre-positioned in warehouses across the affected provinces, but logistics logs showed less than 3 days of food and water in the hardest-hit areas. Relief trucks were staged inland, but blocked ports and flooded roads delayed resupply. The Department of Public Works and Highways confirmed that some seawalls had only been patched with sandbags and might not withstand a new onslaught. In San Miguel Bay and eastern Cagayan, the surge could reach up to 2 kilometers inland if peak winds and high tide coincided. The International Federation of Red Cross reported that shelters were filling, but the speed at which conditions changed left little room for adjustment. Every decision, from where to stage rescue teams to when to open additional shelters, had to be made with incomplete information and shrinking windows of time. By the time Uwan's eye passed over the coast, the damage was already visible. Roads buckled, bridges twisted, and entire neighbourhoods sat under brown water mixed with debris. Power outages spread as the first bands of the typhoon snapped lines and toppled trees. In the impact zone, floodwaters climbed fast, pushing into streets and fields. On the ground, local officials used loudspeakers to call on anyone left behind to get to higher ground. The President's emergency order was in effect, unlocking extra resources for rescue and relief. But the message from every level was clear. If you're in a low-lying or coastal area and have not already moved, do so now. The typhoon's power was not slowing down. Conditions could change by the hour. For many families, this was a nightmare they had rehearsed but hoped never to live. A drill turned real. In the days that followed, the scale of the disaster became clearer. Nearly 110 million Filipinos face a future where super typhoons may strike closer together, fueled by record-warm Pacific waters. Uwan was not an anomaly. It was part of a pattern, a trend that scientists have been tracking with growing concern. The question is no longer whether these storms will come, but how prepared the country will be when they do. How we prepare and who we trust will decide not just survival, but recovery. In storms like these, clear warnings save lives. Rumours do not. The real danger lies not just in the wind or the rain, but in the gaps between what we know, what we can predict, and what we are willing to act on before it is too late.